Thief 4, or Thief 2014, or just Thief, whatever you want to call it, is a reboot of the legendary Thief series of stealth games. It was developed by Eidos Montreal and published by Square Enix. It was a different team at Eidos than the ones that made the new Deus Ex games. This game infamously received mixed reception, with there being many who liked it and many who vehemently hated it. Thief 4 is widely despised among older fans for lacking a lot of the things that the original trilogy had. It's possibly one of the most divisive games ever made. So before I can talk about the game proper, I want to cover a little bit of context. What was the deal with the original Thief games? Well, I'll tell you. The original Thief trilogy consists of stealth-focused immersive sims. The player takes the role of Garrett, who is frail and weak in a fight, so you must rely on stealth and gadgets in order to survive. You're basically kleptomaniac Batman in the steampunk Middle Ages. You have many tricks up your sleeve, most notable which being the usage of light and sound propagation. A famous element of these titles is their focus on sound. If you walked on a quiet surface, you could run or even jump without making a sound. You could even hear enemies from rooms away and locate them based on the sounds of their footsteps. So you're thrust into open-ended levels with only your gadgets and stealth capabilities to aid you. Excellent level design makes the levels circularly navigable with a strong degree of verticality and freedom. You're often given a set of objectives which will require you to snoop around a massive level in order to complete them. All elements are dynamic, so if you have a rope arrow, you can attach it to any wooden surface. If you see a fire, you can always put it out. Ultimately, it's all about using your wits to break in, snatch loot, and escape intact. It's the excellent level design, sense of dynamism, fantastic sound design, ninja-like stealth, intriguing world, and strong player agency that make the original Thief trilogy so widely beloved. Opinions are more divided on a third game, Deadly Shadows, but it still retains a lot of these quality elements. Thief 4, well, it takes more after Deadly Shadows to say the least. I want to get it out of the way immediately that, while Thief 4 is a subpar game, it's far from the worst game I've ever played. However, I have a particularly personal dislike of this game. In a bubble, it's an extremely mediocre 10s era stealth game, suffering from just about every trope of the era. When taken into context of the rest of the series, it's almost insulting, and it just simply doesn't have the faintest idea of what made the original game so enjoyable in the first place. Even in the first level, many of the problems with Thief 4 are on full display. In fact, how about I take you through the first couple of minutes? The player is immediately presented with 3 vague difficulty options in a custom difficulty mode. However, this custom option is a little bit of an illusion. You set a difficulty preset and can add more difficulty increasers on top, such as no mid-mission saves. I don't care for this, it's pathetic in comparison to most other custom difficulty modes I've seen. Alright, the first few rooms teach the player the basics, stealth not being one of these basics. In the very first room, you find an abundance of petty loot pickups. You slowly ransack this whole room for a rather meager amount of gold. The next room introduces you to birds and finding secret buttons on paintings. Okay. Then, right after that, you're taught about rope arrows. You're implicitly taught that you can only shoot these on specific contextual blocks of wood with rope on them. You climb up and get introduced to your obnoxious female sidekick. At this point, you may reflect on the layout of the level so far and how it's been a straight line with no deviation. Have you had any choice at all so far? Have you had any options so far? You got all that? Good. I want you to remember 3 terms for the problems here: contextuality, linearity, and stinginess. It's really odd to me how the developers put some of the worst aspects on the game full display right off the bat, but it sure sets the scene. As I mentioned before, this game is a reboot. You still play as Garrett here, but it's unclear if this is the same Garrett from the original trilogy. Evidently, he's currently undergoing a midlife crisis and an emo phase at the same time. Similarly, his female companion is a goth chick with a big personality. By big personality, I mean she won't stop whining and bickering. Don't worry, she gets banished to oblivion for most of the plot. It's immediately obvious that there's been some major change in direction. I won't really talk much about the story from here on out because I skipped most of the cutscenes. It's basically about Garrett slowly rescuing his sidekick using the power of blue stones. It doesn't matter. From now on, I'll try to avoid directly referencing the original games unless necessary. Let's start talking about gameplay. Stealth is fairly standard modern stealth. It focuses on line of sight and staying crouched. A prompt pops up over the head of enemies when they see you, with each pip on it representing how detected you are. The relation between lighting and visibility has been kept, but the states of the light gem are discrete. You're either fully visible, slightly visible, or concealed, with no in-betweens. Light levels that look like they'd leave you partially visible may be considered complete darkness, or, on the other hand, spots that look like they'd make you invisible may be considered bright light. This game is rather inconsistent, so chances are you may be caught by guards, not of your own fault, but because this game has glaucoma or maybe some light sensitivity. Light is already hard to judge in general anyways, as almost nothing in this game visually appears to be complete darkness. A major feature of the original games was the ability to lean, which let you peek around corners without exposing yourself. Here, they've made it contextual. You can only lean around corners that developers believed you should be able to lean around. Unfortunately, their choices of corners are stupid, which is a sentence I never thought I'd utter. Garrett barely peeks out at all, so you can't even make do with the awful contextuality of the system. Leaning is slow and sticky, so you may accidentally waste time or put yourself in a bad situation by trying to perform the simple act of peeking around a corner. Also, it's easy to accidentally enter a lean while trying to pick up items. In exchange for this new jankiness, you've been given 2 new abilities. One is a swoop. With this move, Garrett can roll. It's a fun move if I'm being honest. I think better implementation could have helped it since you generally can't really use it to move quickly between shadows. This game gives you a confusing loading screen tip saying it's silent, but it's also not silent. Birds can detect you through walls whenever you swoop, despite the game only saying that they're responsive to fast movement and loud noises. Birds rarely appear and are extremely hard to see, but when they do appear, they're placed with active malice. Some developer had murderous intent. The other new ability is the most bog standard modern stealth game garbage, focus. Want to take a guess what this does by default? You might get it. It highlights enemies and loot through walls. Since they give you this by default, they really want you to use it. Unlike Garrett, I'm a rebel, so I never use it until later on for demonstration purposes. I really didn't need it. Simply being observant of my environment was a lot more enjoyable to me. You can get a ton of upgrades to make it really overpowered, but this game is rather easy in the first place, so I didn't bother. You probably want me to talk about the AI now, but there really isn't much to say about it. It's archetypical stealth game AI. They take a few moments to spot you and have the memory of a sea sponge. They sometimes won't investigate distractions and will instead stare in the direction of the distraction, which is often undesirable. They're actually a bit more observant than most and will investigate suspiciously open doors or quench light sources. Aside from that, it's standard fare. I don't have any major issues with it. On a positive note, the lockpicking minigame is my personal favorite iteration in the series. It's simple, quick, worth upgrading too. It's still in real time, which is nice. Making a mistake makes noise, which guards will investigate, so it punishes players appropriately and places extra pressure on the player to be quick and efficient. Good design. Movement is functional, I suppose. You're not too slow or too fast, and moving around feels alright. The primary problem is a loss of freedom of movement. You need to crouch in order to be stealthy, and things like mantling are contextual. There's less skill and finesse to it in general. In the older games, it often felt like you were sprinting around on your tiptoes. Here, it's like any mediocre stealth game. I have serious issue with jumping and how contextual it is, as well. Garrett's knees and survival instincts have gotten weaker over the years, so he'll only jump if his destination is the bottom of a pit. The few times he doesn't repaint the pavement, jumping feels incredibly stilted and awkward. Similarly to leaning, you can only jump at spots where developers intended you to be able to jump, and good luck with it too, because jumping just outright doesn't work properly most of the time anyways. The bow is a key piece of your arsenal. It's slow to prime and fire, but it's reliable nonetheless. You have various arrow types such as broadhead, water, blunt, choke, fire, and rope. Broadhead, sawtooth, fire, and blast arrows are more for damage output than anything else. Water arrows quench fire, and rope arrows create a rope in contextual spots. The most original new addition here is the blunt arrows, which are primarily used to hit buttons or destructible objects from a distance. Choke arrows stun enemies, knock out animals, and can quench fires. The new blast arrows are an uber expensive I win button. Fire arrows ignite torches and burn oil slicks, but when would you ever need to do either of those things? My major problem is that arrows are a lot rarer now. Since this game is designed around a hub, more later, arrows must be more scarce as a result. This means less freedom to expend your arrows and more hoarding for a rainy day that never comes. I saw oil slicks in later levels, and I think that was the only time I ever used fire arrows, because the game was borderline begging me to do it. Once again, contextuality is a major issue. You will never use a rope arrow in a clever, organic way. You only ever get to use them in the ways the developers want you to use them. So chances are you'll go most of this game without ever using most of your stock of arrows, simply because they're probably too niche or too scarce to really use them. In order to knock enemies out, you need to use your blackjack. But oh god, the blackjack! What have they done to my precious beating stick? While it technically still functions the same, it's seen some changes to implementation. Before, you actually swung the blackjack yourself. The hit detection was generally fairly reliable and the act was quick. You could blackjack a guy and continue bunny hopping uninterrupted. It was silent, so you could take down a chain of guards in rapid succession without even a peep from them. Here, the game wrestles control away from you so that Garrett can sensually caress the guard card for about 5 minutes. You don't actually blackjack anyone, you hit a key to watch Garrett blackjack someone. These animations are long, not very satisfying, and inconsistently noisy. This is rather bizarre to me. The blackjack was such a simple gadget, but here they wanted to make it as dumb and convoluted as possible. How do you screw up a club that silently knocks unaware people out so badly? Also, if you knock out a civilian, it's an instant game over, at least on the hardest setting it is. The morality in this game is odd. You can freely kill guards, but knocking out civilians is off the table. Garrett breaks his goth girlfriend slash sister slash what in the world is their relationship about killing guards in the first mission, which implies Garrett is a pacifist. The gameplay doesn't agree with him on that one. I originally wanted to put this in the level design segment, but it's good here too. In chapter 3, Garrett says he should turn on a machine and knock out everyone in the level. If you're playing on the lower difficulty settings, this is a non-choice, as you'd be an idiot to not turn it on. However, if you're playing on the hardest difficulty like me, turning the machine on gives you an instant game over. It's because it knocked out civilians. Why does the game present you with this choice, in quotes, if it's literally an instant game over without warning? You no longer have a sword in this game. Garrett instead uses a blackjack in combat. They tried to refine and modernize the combat, which I can't really hold against the developers. Problem is, it's a really painful and stiff rhythm game. Guard AI is weird in combat, and you're invincible when you dodge. You can theoretically endlessly huddle in a corner mashing the dodge button and be fine, but I didn't test it. I had a hard time with this combat anyways because it feels so awkward and delayed. You can stunlock crossbow guards and most enemies have trouble fighting back at all, but the few that do fight back will probably kick your ass in 1 or 2 hits. The stealth is easy enough that I was able to generally avoid combat. There's no weight or feeling of power to it, so it's pretty unsatisfying. Good reason to avoid it in its own right. Jumping off from combat, this game has a stupid system where it ranks your playstyle at the end of a mission. From most stealthy to least stealthy, you'll either be ranked as a ghost, opportunist, hybrid, or predator. Most people will likely rank as opportunist since doing God knows what can lock you out of ghost, and predator is earned by engaging in combat. You can beat a mission without any detections or knockouts and still fail to ghost because I hate this game. Now I'd be willing to accept this if it was just a statistical assessment of your playstyle, but it's not. Missions will have different gold awards based on your playstyle from the previous missions. So if you decide to ghost a mission but you rank predator in the previous mission, you'll likely miss out on a decent sum of gold in exchange. It's punishing players for varying up their playstyle. I never like it when games give you mid-mission challenges like perform 5 air assassinations anyways. Let me play the way that I want to play. Instead of locking large amount of monies behind arbitrary challenges, why not pay me purely based on loot found? It's called Thief, not Air Assassinator. To cap off this section, I should mention the upgrades. This is the kind of upgrade system I hate. Abstract upgrades with only a vague notion of what they will do. What does slightly faster mean? Give me numbers or percentages. Even if the description said increases bow speed from 100 to 200, that would give me an idea of the magnitude of the upgrade. Why should I invest in something if I only have the vaguest of ideas of what it will do? This game is fairly easy in the first place, and a player going for ghost or at least general stealth won't need most of these at all. The only upgrades I ever purchased were lockpicking speed and one for my bow draw because I didn't know what to do with my money. I probably didn't even need any of these. I bought some stuff at the end game to experiment, but it doesn't matter at that point. But you know what upgrades in this game are worthwhile? The wrench and a wire cutter. The wrench is comically powerful, opening up objectively correct stealth options in nearly every level of the game. You'd be an absolute fool to not buy the wrench as soon as possible because of how utterly vital it is. It's more vital here than it would be for a serial killer whose name is Wrenchman. If you're not sold on it already, here's a wrench tip. Buying it means the game will be over faster. Similarly, the cutters just make your life a lot easier by totally negating traps that are otherwise impossible to disarm. Why lock such vital abilities that have no substitutes behind upgrades? Knowing what they do, why would the player not buy them as soon as possible? Yet again, no player choice. The original Thief games are renowned for their excellent sound design, so how's the sound design in Thief 4?
Thanks.
I see you have 2 new blossoms working tonight.
Yes. Peach and Neroli. They're good girls.
Then I expect that to be reflected in your contribution.
But you already upped the black tax twice this quarter.
It's coming loose.
like that again, you little whore.
The sound design in this game is abysmal in general. Audio mixing is really bad, especially voices. No longer can you really hear your own footsteps or the footsteps of guards. You can get an ability for focus that makes enemy footsteps visual, but who really cares? Some surfaces do still create more or less noise, but the difference is hard to notice, so it's generally not worth bothering. You'll generally want to stay crouched to minimize the constant noise you generate from moving around. You'll sometimes stumble upon water currents or broken glass that cause loud noise to step on, forcing you to move painfully slowly through them instead, typically with no other way around them. The mechanical depth from the sound design is almost absent here, and the few ways it does use sound often drag the game down. You simply have no good way to gauge how much noise you're generating at a given moment beyond experimentation. Noise levels in the original games are very consistent. You knew that you could silently sprint on carpet, and that even slow crouching on tile was still noisy. Now, crouch to win. Who wants mechanical complexity like this in a stealth game? Why would you want to move quickly or perform 6 silent bunny hops? Hit that sneak button. The soundscape itself is fine though. I do kind of like the interior ambience in this game. It's rather calming. Very calming for a game about breaking into houses. Also, noisemaker arrows are gone and have been replaced with oddly rare distraction bottles. They're really scarce at times, so it's another thing you'll hoard for a rainy day. Real quickly, I want to talk about the visuals, but I don't have much to say here. The architecture of the city is quite nice. I like the later Victorian feel of it and the outfit designs. I don't like it as much as the setting of the previous games. It's had a more Renaissance, Industrial Revolution feel to them. The visuals struggle technically, however. The biggest problem I have is with the egregious fog that is still awful indoors at times. I find that it looks really ugly and it's probably there to conceal low LOD or something like that. The bloom in this game is also pretty obnoxious. I've seen worse bloom, but this is definitely worse than average. This game runs on Unreal 3 as far as I'm aware, which might be one of the reasons why this game doesn't look that good. But what I do have a good few things to say about is the setting. Garrett doesn't seem much older in this game, but Erin, who I assume to be the girl from the end of Deadly Shadows, is now an adult in this game. Is she even the same person? Heck, is this even the same Garrett? The iconic factions of the previous games are completely absent here. No Hammerites, no Pagans, no Keepers, nothing. There's only incredibly vague nods to these factions like the Keeper motifs in the underground fortress on Mission 3. Without these factions, a lot of the character of the series is simply gone. Now the primary antagonist is some satirically evil dude who really hates thieves and probably kicks puppies. Compare that to Thief 1 where the antagonist is a literal pagan god and something is obviously missing. With that, the supernatural elements are mostly absent in this game. It never takes any opportunities to warp reality around you or take you somewhere bizarre and exotic. Now it's overwhelmingly in the city or sometimes underground, and you're pretty much always up against guards. Kinda lame. According to the Thief Wiki, which could or could not be a reliable source, it is likely that this game takes place in the same universe, but hundreds of years in the future. There's apparently a pretty massive list of small clues and references, and it's established that things like paganism were outlawed in the city at some point. So hold up, you're telling me that this is an entirely separate Garrett, who also happens to be a master thief, and this is an entirely separate Erin, who also happens to be trained by Garrett, and they both happen to operate in the same city their ancestors did? What? Who wrote this? Stephen Gallagher. Well, he's not the last Stephen who's going to be popping up in this episode. Moving on, level design is the most cardinal sin this game tends to commit. Thief 1 and 2 are known for their massive, sprawling levels. They were circularly navigable, had a sense of verticality, offered the player a lot of navigational freedom, and were specifically designed so that a player could perfectly ghost a level and collect all the loot and run. In Thief 4, the sprawling and non-linear levels are completely absent. Levels are now tiny, extremely linear to the point of being a straight line at times, overly scripted, and filled with bad 10s era design. And that's on top of further complications such as wonky light levels, objective markers, blatant separation between right way and wrong way, etc. Looking back on it now, Thief 4's biggest problem truly does stem from its level design, or near lack of it. I think I've played some random amateur Doom wads that offer the players more freedom than this game does. Thief 2014 suffers from a problem I have named Invisible War Syndrome, a reference to the disappointing sequel to Deus Ex. Graphics and consoles were a high priority to the developers, but trade-offs needed to be made in order for the game to look good and play well on a console. As a result, levels are small, cramped, and highly highly sequestered. This game has many blatant sequestering points hidden in plain sight. As a result, segments of levels can feel claustrophobic because of how tiny they actually are, and backtracking can sometimes be impossible. It's not as egregious in Thief 4 as it was in Invisible War, but you can certainly feel it. It's the same general set of problems. I want to talk about the worst case of level design, the hub. Goodness gracious, do I hate the hub. This is a page taken straight out of Deadly Shadows book, which is incidentally a missing page from the Necronomicon. Hilariously, the hub actually has the opposite problem with the rest of the game's level design. It's far too sprawling. It's split across 6 areas, each one having a loading screen transition. While it's a fairly detailed hub filled with secrets and nooks and crannies to explore, it's tedious and confusing. There is some fun to be had here early on, taking small jobs at break and enter into houses, finding secrets in bookcases, evading traps, and so forth. In fact, for a while I quite liked the hub, but this gives away rapidly after several missions into the main quest. The hub begins to branch off a lot, so you need to memorize some good routes across it. Guard patrols the streets of the hub at all times and will attack on sight. This in itself isn't a bad thing, but the problem is, they're everywhere, and they respawn fast. Some of these encounters become nearly impossible to sneak through in the later game, but the game keeps wanting you to sneak through them. Since they don't stay knocked out or dead, you'll frequently have to repeat these encounters. Similarly, locks you picked will magically become unpicked between any missions, adding to the chore factor. Some of the hardest encounters in the game are in the hub for whatever reason, so have fun with that. In order to counteract some of these stupid guard placements here, you need to find routes. Taking the rooftops is completely safe, which can make it rather boring at times, but it's often your best option. You also can memorize exactly which windows take you where on other maps, which can save you a lot of time, giving you stealthier routes past guards encounters. It feels like the game forces you to take longer routes as you go on, rapidly wearing out the charm of the hub. Of all of the things you could steal from Deadly Shadows, you stole the hub? Almost no matter what, you have to pass through multiple loading screens to do anything in the hub. Sometimes these windows transition between levels, and it's an utter guessing game as to whether you'll hit a loading screen or not with these. When navigation in the hub consistently makes you want to stop playing, something is really wrong. Do you think my channel will become a hub for awful hubs? Okay, the actual level design now. There's a complete lack of player agency in these levels. They're so linear and you're overwhelmingly funneled right into encounters. There is a degree of circular navigability in some levels, but it's minute in general. Heck, I'd call it cheating at times, because of course a small, open rectangular arena can be traversed circularly. Side missions tend to have their own little levels, which are often simultaneously the best and worst the game has to offer. The first full-fledged side mission in the game is a tailor mission, where you need to break into a tailor's shop. I quickly drew the map from memory, and it should be on screen right now. Believe it or not, but this is one of the least insufferable levels in the game. It is an incredibly small map, dwarfed by the likes of my It feels like something that they originally wanted to put in the hub, but since it was a lot more intricate than most of the other hub content, they just crammed it into a tiny side level. Now, on screen is another version of the map with neon pink lines indicating route you should realistically take. It's half ours, so don't worry about it. Each red dot represents an enemy, if you didn't put that together. Obviously, you'd want to take the route of least resistance, so you don't confront the enemy guarding the front door of the building, and instead go for the window entry to the second floor at the back of the building. From there, you sneak past one guard, slip downstairs into the basement, and lockpick a safe to acquire the objective item. Then you just need to flee, which can be done by taking the same route or by slipping behind the tailor himself. This level is small and condensed, and it has a right way to sneak through it. All of the side missions are like this, having only one real way to stealth your way through. Sure, you can fight your way through, but good luck with both combat and the resources that you need to expend to do that. Stealth in this game is rather easy because of this, so you can often just get by if you use your intuition. It reminds me of Invisible War and how there's such an obvious separation between the level's stealthy route and its combat route. Front doors are consistently one of two ways to enter a building, and they're consistently the wrong way. No real player choices involved in this matter. You might say,
well, that's a side level, so of course it's not up to snuff with the actual campaign missions, sorry.
And you're somewhat right. The campaign missions drag out to offer level designs for much longer periods of time. This game's levels are basically stealth-flavored Skyrim dungeons, except without the goofy jankery that is Skyrim's stealth, magic, and combat. So whereas a tailor shop is a quick peek into a dungeon, let's take a quick peek at several of the 8 chapters from the campaign. I'll be nice to this game and start off with its best chapters, chapters 1 and 6. Chapter 1 is relatively linear, but offers offers up some opportunities for some fun stealth and theft. It's mostly evading guards and alleyways, but it does open up about halfway through. There's actually multiple ways to approach and break into this small mansion, and there's quite a bit of loot inside of it. There's a genuinely pretty fun, intense part where you have to crack a safe right under the nose of its owner. Upstairs, there's a ton of cases to steal from and a safe right next to a sleeping guard. Don't mess up and wake him up. This level also features a lightning gimmick where lightning will occasionally strike and make you visible for a brief moment. Don't worry, it's predictable and telegraphed a few seconds in advance. I'm not sure what exactly it is about this level that did it for me, but the burglary is one of the best in the entire game. There's something satisfying about how many opportunities the section gives you to steal things borderline right in front of people. It's nowhere near as quality as the original Thief, but it's an enjoyable mission nonetheless. It feels like a bit more knowledge of the game's mechanics are put into this level than most, which is nice. Chapter 6 is also mansion break-in, but this time around it's actually sprawling and filled with both traps and secrets. There's multiple ways to navigate some of the areas, and it's one of the most loot-dense missions in the game. Of all the missions in the game, this one resembles the original titles the most. It's still a little linear, but it feels like it gives the player a lot more freedom to navigate as they please. But this later part can go screw itself. It took me a ton of retries to ghost my way through this stupid segment, only to not actually get a ghost rating at the end of the mission. Also, it ends with a heavily scripted segment where you have to run from a fire. Jumping is still quirky, so it's easy to accidentally jump, or not jump properly, to your death. But what about the bad chapters? Chapter 2 and 4 come across as the worst this game has to offer. Chapter 2 is painfully linear, so much so that the map is blatantly a straight line at some points. In fact, this map outright has you on rails at some points, literally. I think Chapter 2 is the apex of the problems with the general level design. The level is separated into a ton of small arenas with a handful of guards in each of them, and it's up to you to find the developer's chosen way. There's a small degree of circularity in this level, but it's so minor you may as well call it squarularity. Guard patterns are very simple in general in this game, often alternating between 2 or 3 positions, and the events you unlock with your wrench make some sections of this level completely trivial. This level is when it starts to occur to me that trying to loot makes the game a lot harder, since it can require you to slip into very narrow gaps in patrol timing. There is a fun safe puzzle in this level though, which spawned one digit off from the actual code for me. The level has no interlocking parts, to best put it. You're funneled directly from one arena into another after a short transition of some kind. You can't go back after reaching certain checkpoints, and thus mistakes in earlier segments can't have consequences in later parts. In the original games, every level is a hole. If an alarm went off early on, it'll keep going off until the end. They also let you backtrack all the way back to the start, giving levels a sense of uninterrupted scale. Locations had an organic and real feel that even modern games, especially Thief 4, often fail to recreate. Thief 4 does a horrible job grounding you relative to the rest of the series. It's why when Thief 1 had a level where space-time warped around a player, it became one of the most beloved and memorable levels in game history. This isn't even believable design for the location it takes place in. Why is this foundry designed this way? Why does the line take such a long route to its final destination? Why is this office at the end of the level so far away from the entrance? How do people navigate this place? It's a weird case of sacrificing realism for worse levels. This location isn't fun to navigate, nor is it a believable place. If the whole level was interconnected, it would make sense from both a gameplay and design standpoint and would actively make the level a dozen times more fun. Also, you can even see how areas are subdivided into checkpoints on this fan-made map I've been showing. Good on whoever put this together. Chapter 4 is technically better than Chapter 2, but it hurt a bit more. It's the difference between being shot in the stomach and being shot in the crotch. It opens up the most daring thing this game's done so far. It presents you with 3 routes to enter the mansion, and 2 of them are wrong. Now, this aside, this level does start pretty promising. Another mansion break-in, so that shows promise. Maybe it'll be more challenging, interesting, and innovative than the one on the first Oh wait, there's an easy-to-find secret elevator that skips this whole segment. Short of wanting 100% loot, you can just beeline to the elevator. You solve a small puzzle, and,
The architect! Murdered! Caught backhanded!
Yeah, we've lost something here. The thing that made the series so beloved was its lack of scripted segments and action set pieces. Thief is a series all about dynamism and player freedom, so when you're forced into this on-rails spunk gargle wee wee hog donkey, it feels wrong. And most of the rest of the level isn't even stealth, it's running and some minor environmental puzzle solving. By the time I got to the safe at the very end of the level, I just googled the combination because I just wanted the mission to stop. The mission ends with a very dangerous encounter, 5 guards in one room, 4 of them on the other side of the room from the objective. Wow. I wrote a review on Steam about this game a good while back when I first played it, and Chapter 4 was one of the few things I praised. Was I drinking or something? Though to be fair, it's basically the only thing in my review I disagree with now. Also, people will probably want me to mention Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is bad. It's praised for its horror, but frankly, there's almost nothing here. There are literally only 2 rooms you need to sneak through in the mission. It's more of a prolonged, interactive, horror-flavored cutscene than anything else. Gameplay is almost constantly interrupted by short hallucination sequences and unskippable cutscenes. The game simply doesn't let its horror build up and instead substitutes build up for jump scares. This mission is set in an asylum but has no actual reason to be set in an asylum. They just want that obligatory spooky haunted house mission and they failed. The game hypes up these mutant monsters on Chapter 3, only for them to appear a handful of times throughout the latter half of the game. If you've played any stealth or maybe horror game in the last decade, you know exactly what these enemies are. They can hear well, but they're blind. Are you riveted by this creative enemy design? They're pretty easy because of how slow they are. Hilariously, I think you'd simply run right through this encounter because of the way it's designed, but I didn't try it. On a side note, I like the Skull side quest. It had a sense of humor and a bit of charm that no other level in the game had. Similarly, I like the Dollar General Clockwork Mansion, even if the level was nothing but puzzles with no stealth. There's good ideas for levels in here, but they're mere tastes of good ideas for good levels. For a big budget title, why are the levels consistently worse than fan-made levels for the original games? I'll finish up the second I mention that there's a couple stealth-flavored boss fights. The final boss is just a stay out of the light deal, it's kinda boring. The penultimate boss is the antagonist, and it's a good idea poorly executed. He fires explosive arrows at the walls in an attempt to light the room and force you out of stealth or cover. It's a bit fun, but it's blatantly unfair because he one-shots you and his pattern is rather unpredictable. I'm not sure what determines where he fires beyond randomness and sometimes making noise. I managed to lockpick my way out without killing him. Pacifist run, baby! It's time to address the elephant in the room, the animations. Assuming you've been watching the video, not just listening to the audio, you've seen how almost everything I do plays a short animation. From takedowns to picking up loot, to opening up doors, snuffing out candles, to leaning, you name it. This is one of the worst aspects of the game because it adds an extra degree of uncertainty to everything you do. A silent takedown leaves you at the mercy of the long takedown animations that offer you no peripheral vision. Picking up loot can potentially get you detected if the game magnetizes you over a noisy surface, so it can blatantly ruin stealth, and you'll get so sick and tired of these transitional animations that require you to mash the interact button. It's awful. I don't know if there's a proper technical term for this, but this is one of those full body awareness games. When you look down, you see your lower half. Garrett does cast a shadow and light in addition to that. Believe it or not, but a lot of first-person titles tend to neglect these things. It's usually a sign that the developers emphasize immersion in their design philosophy. I suppose a natural continuation of this is having Garrett physically grab objects in the world and play animations when he does almost anything of note. While I did like this at first, it grew stale quick. It's an interesting idea to have the player character physically pick up the items rather than them materializing in your pocket, but once you've seen the animations 100 times, it's old. It makes a simple process of stealing loot longer and riskier, more of a chore. These transitional animations, the ones you play between areas, are the worst of it for me. You have to mash E hard in order to get through. These animations are far too long for their own good and really shouldn't force me to mash a button in the first place. You'll see these dozens of times. If you took a shot every time you had to pry open a window in the hub, you'd probably die in 10 minutes. On the bright side, the animation work is fine. There can be some jank here and there, but it's generally fairly smooth and consistent. There's various animations for opening or closing doors depending on the keys you hold when you interact with them, which is a neat touch, even if I do away with door animations in the first place. I also couldn't help but like finding switches in paintings or bookshelves. These remain in first person, they're still interactive, and they make sense. For me, animations are an implementation problem above all else. Too many things play animations that are generally far too slow. Having animations for almost everything overcomplicates simple tasks and adds an extra degree of jank to the game. And, I almost played Jesper Kid in the background here, but that's a copyright can of worms. I'm coming back to this in a short bit anyways. So what about the actual thievery? Well, Garrett only takes petty cash this time around. Almost nothing you steal is remotely worthwhile. This is emphasized by the very first room in the game, where everything in the room is, relatively speaking, petty. You come out of this first room with 100 gold, which is one of the largest single room hauls in the entire game. Let me give you a good measure of how petty this is. A broadhead arrow costs 75 gold, an explosive arrow costs 700 gold. The most basic equipment upgrades are typically close to 2k gold. The most expensive items in a game are close to 30k. There aren't enough funds in an entire main campaign and all side quests to get to 30k. The band-aid solution? You can replay past levels and carry loot forth from them. Lazy. I might need to contextualize my qualms, so think of it this way. Any arrow you buy is an investment. You buy a rope arrow with the hopes that it will pay off for you later on, that you'll get a profit out of it, whether it's monetary or navigational. This never happens once in this entire game. Usually the only thing gated off by rope arrows are collectibles. Assuming you buy the rope arrows instead of finding them in missions or the stash, you can pay 150 gold for rope arrows only to find a worthless collectible in 10 gold. It's outright bad game design, and it feels like punishment for being observant, explorative, and well-equipped. All things that players should never be punished for. In fact, the original games rewarded those things. And loot values really are unbelievably petty in general. You'll steal forks worth 2 gold and cap out extremely rare items worth 100 gold. In other words, the most valuable items you'll ever find are only worth 4/3 of a broadhead arrow. Collectibles don't seem to have any actual value, which means looking for them is for completionists only. In fact, you don't even need to steal in this game. No joke. In Thief 4, it's usually a bad idea to compulsively steal. I'm a bit of a klepto when I play games like these, so I can't help it, but I realize that cash is often too petty for risks too big, so I just rushed past most loot in the later levels. It mostly meant that the game was over faster anyways. To refer back to original Thief games, items were almost always fairly valuable. Loot worth single-digit sums was incredibly rare, whereas that's the bulk of what you find in Thief 4. They had a lot of missions with a couple thousand golds worth of loot, and you typically had to steal a decent sum of it. Here, you'd be lucky to earn 1,000 gold from a mission without obsessively looting everything and completing challenges. In the original games, when you bought rope arrows at the start of mission, you'd often get a return on your investment. Here, there's never that sort of risk investment or planning for missions, since they have to design missions so that you can complete them without using any gadgets, owing to the hub. But then they need to try find a way to reward uses of rope arrows, so they gatekeep valueless collectibles behind them. It's a mess. And remember, you play an animation every time you open a drawer, a bureau, a chest, you name it. That's on top of the animation Garrett already plays when he picks up an item. As a result, you can't loot quickly because the game strips control away from the player for numerous seconds. There's no longer a satisfying sound when you pick up loot, instead being replaced with a much softer. Wow, I feel like Thief 4 is trying to discourage me from theft. Is it trying to send a message of some kind? Stealing is bad for you? Who knows? So I couldn't help but be curious about what happened behind the scenes here. This game made me feel like there was some kind of development turmoil, but was there? Thief 4 is developed by a team at Eidos Montreal, one unrelated to the team that developed Human Revolution. It was first revealed to the public in 2009, and the development team was incredibly small for years. It was originally intended for a 7th generation release, but ended up with an 8th generation release in the end. They also ended up using Unreal 3, which was the town bicycle of game engines at the time. You know how you can just kind of tell a game uses Unreal 3? Yeah. At some point close to the end of 2012, there was some sort of factional split during the development of the game. Eidos' founder split off against the publisher, Square Enix, but I struggled to find specifics on what exactly went down or why it happened. The most common answer is that there was some sort of severe mismanagement from Square Enix. Numerous lead and senior designer positions changed multiple times throughout actual development, a very bad sign. The producer was Mario Aguirre for a long time. If I mispronounce that, I don't care, but was switched to Stephen Roy, assumedly due to a split occurring at the time. Supposedly, under Mario Aguirre, this game had become an Assassin's Creed clone. See, I told you we'd come back to that. You can very clearly see elements of this Assassin's Creed game that never was in a finished product. Once Stephen Roy took over as producer, it seems like the game shifted back to being a first-person stealth game, as God intended. In the span of about a year, he converted this knockoff Assassin's Creed into a first-person stealth 'em up. The fact that this game is just mediocre and not absurdly awful is a bit of a testament to how good of a job they did in such limited time. That's not calling the game good, or developers talented, it's just saying that it's a lot less disappointing than it probably could have been. Also, they had Stephen Russell, the original voice actor of Garrett and many other game characters, working on the game at one point. I mentioned him in my Underworld Ascendant video, except they decided to replace him with Romano Orzari instead. Something to do with the mocap. This guy does an okay job, but he's nowhere near as good as good old Stephen Russell. So, in short, yeah, development is pretty disastrous. But it really could have been much worse. It's a good thing that it went back to being a first-person stealth game. Could you imagine if, say, Doom 2016 turned into a third-person stealth 'em up? That could have been weird. Weird in the same sense that Thief being turned into Assassin's Creed clone would have been weird. So, to summarize, Thief 4 has very little in common with the original games aside from the universe and the fact that they're stealth games. It struggled to stand even on its own merits because it suffers from many of the problems that games from the era suffered from. It's among the most mediocre games I've played in my life. Almost nothing about it is horrifically awful or unpleasant, but what is here can't be described as good, that's for sure. I've hated other games a lot more, but my hatred of Thief 4 is a bit more personal, if that makes any sense. It's a game that abandoned the player agency, level design, and personality of the previous games in favor of being incredibly milquetoast. It took few risks and ended up being relegated to the back of my mind as that stealth game only notable for its IP. You know what I mean? It has a laundry list of questionable design choices that never strain to being absurdly awful or unpleasant, but come across as fundamental misunderstandings of what made the original game so beloved. Maybe you can even interpret it as a misunderstanding of what makes stealth games fun, though personally I wouldn't go that far. It's not that good of a game, but it does have some moments. So, let's reiterate. This game struggles with how contextual everything is. There's no dynamism anymore, no multi-purpose tools, no clever ways to use gadgets, nothing like that. It highlights a specific poster with rope wrapped around it and commands you to fire a rope arrow there. It shows you an oil puddle and gives you fire arrows like it's jangling keys in your face. You can't even jump outside of designated jumping spots. There's simply no freedom. It sometimes presents you with two solutions to your problems, but these solutions boil down to the smart way and the idiot way. Why take the front door when the game blatantly gives you far more viable side passages? Why take a route through the hub that's crawling with guards? Why engage in this game's awful combat? Levels may as well be slightly curvy straight lines. Player choice is an illusion. The hub may be rather nuanced and interlinked in comparison to the rest of the game, but that works against it because of how much more time it forces the player to spend there. A hub is supposed to be a jumping off point, not an obstacle course. The game also has a disturbingly fetishistic obsession with pulling you out of it. Constant cutscene interruptions in missions, constant animations for the simplest tasks. I can't even open a door without being locked in place for multiple seconds. Once again, there's no sense of dynamism or speed anymore. Garrett takes his time like he's on a leisurely stroll, and not surrounded by a dozen guards eager to widen his Dollar General Ezio arsehole. And for a game called Thief, it sure is a pain to actually steal things. What kind of bizarro stuff is happening with this economy? Is Garrett being scammed by the shopkeepers? Is he an actual klepto this time around, making a living off of selling forks? It doesn't feel like you're an actual thief anymore. You don't even need to steal in order to beat the game. It's almost a miracle that this game works. It feels like an experimental game to me, like they wanted to try modernizing the core Thief formula. I highly doubt we'll get a sequel at all, let alone one that opens up the level design and tool set. People are so insulted by this game because it's a reboot of the definitive set of stealth games, or stealth-flavored immersive sims. Thief, the Dark Project, was a major trendsetter. There was very little like it, and there's been very little like it since. Thankfully for us, we can look forward to the indie market or even mods to satisfy cravings for more Thief-like content. So, in summary, Thief 4 is a subpar game. On its own merits, it's rather mediocre. As a reboot of the original Thief series, it's pretty bad. Ironically, what Eidos didn't realize is that nobody would have held it against them if they stole things from the original Thief games other than their valor. Thief 4 has almost a terminal fear of being like its predecessors when, in reality, stealing ideas would have made for a far better game. There, I crammed in the obligatory theft joke at the very end. Happy? Critics were pretty generous at this game, if you ask me. Maybe too generous. Though in all fairness, a 7 out of 10 from a professional game critic would be equivalent to 5 out of 10 anywhere else. Remember, 5 out of 10 is a median value. It should be a score that every mediocre AAA title thrown our way gets. But don't worry, every new COD is gonna get its wiener spit polished by the critics. I don't get the idea of using a scale if you're not gonna touch most of it. 7 out of 10 is an astoundingly stupid point to set the average, and that's why
End of review tangent excluded.
Thief 4 gets a 3 out of 10 from me. That's probably what you wanted to hear here. That's all for this episode. Tune in next time for something that's probably actually obscure for once. Take care, and don't forget to play the original Thief games, you taffer. Seriously, they're unironically really good. My upload schedule is likely going to permanently slow down from this point onwards, but see you then.